And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Mark Schneider, CEO of Nestlé, and our very own Mindy Luber, Ceres CEO and President. They will be discussing how Nestlé's creating shared value approach sits within their long-term business value creation model. They'll dig into some specific examples of climate-related commitments that Nestlé has made, including their net zero commitment. And finally, they'll address how Nestlé has engaged with activists and ESG investors to balance near-term results with long-term value, and look at the role that their institutional investors have played in influencing Nestlé's climate commitments. They have a lot to cover in the next 20 minutes, so over to you, Mindy.
Great, thanks, Dawn, and thank you for that video. An extraordinary reminder of the world we're trying to preserve and build, and a people who deserve not to have any more land taken away. Mark, I'm delighted to have you. Having the CEO from Nestlé at this part of our conference is perfect. Thank you for joining us. And let me give you a sense of what you're walking into, Mark. Only good things, I would say. We spent the last 3 days, 1,000 of us strong or so, CEOs of companies, other large company executives, investors from small, medium, and large investment firms, and asset owners, the largest pension funds. We've had regulators, the Federal Reserve Commissioner at the SEC. We'll have a key policymaker in Gina McCarthy following us. We've also had NGOs, we've had academics and others. The beauty of the last 3 days is the following. We don't all agree on everything, but we came together to agree on the urgency of now, on the need to make a difference on issues like equity and climate and where we go as a world community and what it will take to do it. We acknowledged it's not going to be easy, but we also acknowledged if we don't act now, we don't win this fight. And we don't know how to look at our kids if we don't win this fight. We want to build a future for them that makes sense. So a perfect time to talk with you 3 days later. As I said, the discussions have been productive. They've been hopeful. They've been collaborative. They've been about how we come together to build a better future. And you are a key part of that. So let's break to you in particular, and not just to the 1,000 of us strong. You've been on your own journey on sustainability, and I know you personally care. I know since you joined Nestlé as CEO in 2017, the company had started through a creating shared value program, but you've taken it a long way. Tell us a bit about your personal journey, as well as how you're thinking about moving the company forward and what we all have to look for over the next couple of years.
Thanks, Mindy, and thanks again for having me. And also thank you to you and your team for the patient work that Ceres has done over the years in galvanizing the investment community and the private sector companies and moving them towards sustainability agendas and in particular fighting climate change. I think you're at a very exciting spot here, and I think as you describe in the conference, it just epitomizes it. We are building a transmission belt between the capital markets and private sector companies, and that's going to be important so that climate change and addressing climate change will be driven by incentives and not just by regulation. And I think Ceres has a very important role to play in that. Now, when it comes to my personal journey, I'm probably one of these people that you patiently tried to convince over the years. So if we'd had that conversation, today's conversation, like 20 years ago, I would have expressed some caution. I never doubted climate change. I never was one of the people denying it. But I would have said, look, let's wait for a bit more data to come in. Let's try to understand the mechanism of action a little better between greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, so that we're really certain when we commit to these major investments to fight climate change, that we're doing the right thing. Now, it's 20 years later. There's lots more data coming in, all pointing in the same direction. The science is so much better. And yeah, the time to act is now. And to me, leadership is not waiting till everything is done and over and proven, but when you have compelling evidence, at some point, you have to take a certain residual risk and you just go. And that way you avoid being too late. And that's the kind of journey we're on. Inside Nestlé, you're right, this is a company that from its inception in 1867, it has been dealing with fragile agricultural communities around the world as we're sourcing crops and commodities. And so the whole sustainability mindset is one that's very much ingrained in the company. And so the good thing inside the firm is it doesn't take a lot to motivate people to actually work on climate change and other important sustainability topics. And that is something I found really rewarding when I joined the company. So for 2 decades and more, we've been pursuing this creating shared value strategy, where the whole mantra is that we shouldn't just serve our shareholders, but rather, as part of doing business, create value for all the constituents around the table, and of course, for our communities and society at large. So it's been an exciting time. Let me also say the climate topic is seeing tremendous acceleration. When we do market research, the younger, the better educated, the more affluent consumers are. The sustainability topic is off the charts. And then when you look at the regulatory side, clearly with the United States rejoining the Paris Agreement, for the first time now, between the major economies in North America, Europe, and Asia, you have something that is approaching regulatory convergence, and where you're seeing not only longer term commitments, but also nearer term action. And you will see a regulation that will favor companies that are prepared, and it'll mean extra penalties and regulatory hurdles for companies who are not prepared.
So I'm going to jump around a bit. We had talked about a few of the things I wanted to hear about, but I'm going to jump right into what you just started to say about climate change. We're seeing, and we've heard even over the last 3 days, an enormous set of commitments. Some companies who want to change by 2050, by 2040. The one thing we know for certain, we know a lot for certain, but one thing we definitely know for certain is that at this point, the problem of climate change is about scale and pace. Acting in small ways, frankly, is almost not acting. Acting at a pace and scale to get to those Paris-aligned goals is really our only option. How are you going about doing it as a broad multinational company? How do you bring in every part of the firm? How do you show real progress and frankly, make real progress?
Yeah. So look, to me, this is a forward-looking investment. And it is one where we have to manage the tension between today and tomorrow. So if we spend on sustainable matters today, it'll depress near-term profits, but it has to create value down the road. And to me, the closest analogy inside the company is research and development spending, where dollars spent today on a project will depress 2021 profits, but it'll create tomorrow's innovation pipeline and then sales and earnings in the future. And that relationship is not automatic. You have to pick the right projects and you have to handle them right so that that value down the road is created. It's not that different on sustainability matters. You have to pick the projects that really have impact, that have a decent cost-benefit relationship. You got to galvanize the teams around them. You have to have some proper investment governance framework around it, because we're talking multi-billion investments here that need some proper oversight. And then down the road, you get to reap the rewards for that. As I said, the investment case in our industry is primarily made through the changing consumer, which is very clear. The direction is, without doubt. And then there is the regulatory side. And then just like with R&D, the fine art is to pick the right amount. So here again, let's take R&D. We're spending 2% of our revenues on research and development. For our industry, that's a bit on the high side, but it's still within the ballpark. If I spend 5% on it, I would clearly be in a range of diminishing returns, and investors would tell me, hey, go slower because it doesn't make sense. And if I did nothing, then our near-term profits would balloon, but a few years down the road, I wouldn't have a future for the company. And so finding that right balance, there is no hard and fast formula for it. But I think with increasing disclosures that companies now make on their sustainability spending, and also the increasing and improving sustainability disclosures, the investment community will have a sense of judging us against our peers. Like, how much do these folks spend? How much improvement do they make year after year? And so I think over time, just like the financial results, there will be a leaderboard about, who's doing the right things and who isn't.
Well, that certainly is something we heard a lot of over the last 3 days, and we hear a lot of all the time. Companies wanting to move, some investors wanting to move more slowly because it infringes on short-term profits. And so the argument you're making is, look, This is a short, medium, and long-term issue, but it's going to impact the economic strength of the company if you don't act. But certainly a dilemma that we're trying to weave our way through and make sure that the investors at large, even those investors still driven by quarterly earnings, understand the need to act. And that may be investing resources in addressing climate change and other important issues. How do you literally move a company of your size? Long-term goals are great, but when you're talking about short, medium, and long-term goals, what do those look like for you at your company, and how do you make it happen? I mean, you're not trying to move 100 people, 100,000 people. I don't know how many work for you, but you've got a big job. What's the on-the-ground strategic plan?
Yeah. So again, there's been a patient set of projects that we've done over several decades that really gave us a head start on this. But specifically on the climate journey, we've taken the United Nations pledge in September 2019. As you know, as part of that, usually you would have 2 years to work out a time-bound plan on how you achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. From the beginning, we said, no, we're not taking 2 years. We're trying to get this done in a year because in my experience, even a long-term plan, it rarely gets better in the second year. And so let's get the work done and then let's get it out there. The sooner we have the plan, the sooner we can all start implementing in unison. And we got delayed by a few weeks due to COVID, but by December 2020, we were out with our roadmap. I think it's been very favorably received. I think in all modesty, people now see it as one of the benchmarks for how to get these roadmaps right. And when you give a 30-year commitment, I think if you want any credibility in today's world, you have to have pretty strong milestones and toll gates in between that allow people to judge whether you're on track or not. In this whole climate debate, to me, it's less important about who is targeting 20, 40, 50, 60. It's more important about denting the curve the next 10 years and really making some progress in that time. And so to me, the intermediate goals for 2025 and 2030 are really important. And that's something we're trying to stress in that roadmap. And then as a company, we need to dare to go at different speeds. So there's some brands where we will use additional offsetting to be carbon neutral as soon as 2 years from now. And this is where consumers really demand it and where we're up against competition that's also moving fast. And then there's going to be geographies and consumers where, for example, extreme affordability is an important criterion and where we can't price the product out of reach. And so there we need to have the patience to go a little slower, wait for technologies to become cheaper and mature, and then roll out things a little later. So as a company, we will make good on the 2050 commitment, but we'll go at different speeds in different places.
So talk to me a little bit about your 2025 and 2030 and 2035 goals, because as you say, long-term goals are great, but we need to know we're getting started, we're moving so you can reach those long-term goals. We certainly know that anyone who starts in 2045 to reach a 2050 goal will not get there. You've wisely set short-term goals. What do they look like and are they moving forward?
Yeah, so specifically on the greenhouse gases is a 20% reduction in 25 and basically halving it by 2030. And then the balance will get done over the 2 decades afterwards. When you judge our plan, do keep in mind, this is a full scope 3 plan. So it includes our full supply chain. I think in the food and beverage industry, that is important because the major part of our CO2 emissions comes from our supply chain. 95% in fact. And so what happens inside our own 4 walls is only about 5%. On that 5%, you will see us move incredibly fast as we're turning to renewable energy and low emission vehicles and so forth. It's the supply chain work that will take a lot of patience. This is where you're literally pushing on a string because you're working with hundreds and thousands of agricultural suppliers around the world. Many of these do not have extensive financial resources, so you need to move cautiously with them. You need to do a lot of hand-holding. You need to provide some technology assistance and financial assistance as you transition them to better agricultural practices. And this will take time. And hence, this is why the whole project has a fairly long tail end from 2030 to 2050.
Well, we all know that moving the supply chain is one of the great challenges for everybody. You're dealing with, as you say, thousands of small businesses, small vendors. It needs training, it needs resources, and that's where we've got to put some real focus. So it's great to see your company doing that. Mark, you talked about carbon offsets a bit. You know, if you can't reach certain goals, how within the company are you determining what's a legitimate offset or what's just, we're going to go plant some trees, as some like to say, and somehow think the trees will automatically absorb the carbon and poof, everything will be great.
Yeah, so don't get me wrong, the major focus is clearly on our own backyard. And I don't want the team to get distracted from that. If everyone just, goes around buying offsets, I don't think the world is going to get where it needs to get. But in select cases, with pretty strict criteria, I do think for individual brands, there is an opportunity to get to carbon neutrality earlier. It needs to be high quality offsets that are somewhat related to the supply chain of that product. So it doesn't need to be as strict as insetting, where it needs to be, in fact, the very crop and the very farm that you are sourcing from, but it shouldn't be something totally removed. And so this is where we're insisting on pretty high standards. I'd rather pay a premium for that than supporting some sort of dodgy schemes that do not get confidence.
Great. Dodgy schemes we'll put out the door as well, but great to hear your perspective on how offsets may be last resort. What you want your folks really looking at is how to address the problem, not how to buy some way out of it, which is great. And your short, medium, and long-term focus on scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 are exactly what we want to hear. Moving beyond climate, and what we've seen from this past year of COVID is how much of a global world community we are, whether it's COVID, whether it's inequities, whether it's climate. What happens in your country of Switzerland or in Germany or in Bangladesh or in Boston, where I am, impacts everybody, period. We have a world global community that we will either win together or we'll lose it together. And the pandemic was all too realistic a possibility of what it means to get behind where we want to be. What is the role, how do you see your role as the CEO as it speaks to some of these large questions? You can't solve them all on your own, I understand that. But when do you speak up and when do you speak out? And what's the role of the CEO given the trust that the public has right now in the private sector, in CEOs? What's your role?
Mindy, super important topic, and I'm firmly convinced when you look at the next few decades, there is several major bills coming due. Okay, so one is climate change, we just talked about, but you also mentioned societal problems, maintaining a cohesive society, giving equal opportunity to everyone, or in many industrialized countries, coping with an aging society and the stress on pension systems and healthcare systems that's coming from that. So there are pretty major problems here that require everyone to step up. And as I look at various attempts to solve them, it's very clear to me no one can do it alone. It can't be business alone, it can't be government alone, NGOs alone are not equipped to do it, and supranational organizations such as the United Nations alone cannot do it either. It takes the four of us to really get together and overcome some of the initial reluctance maybe from years ago and really work together constructively. And when we do it, we have to be aware of the strengths, but also the limitations that each of these partners has. So when we come to the table as business, we're coming as business, and we should be open about the fact that we're value seeking. It's nothing to hide about. We have other strengths. Governments should not be looked at as being un-entrepreneurial, because their role is not to be entrepreneurial. Their role is to provide public goods and infrastructure. And so if we are open-eyed and clear-eyed about what each and every one of us has to offer and strengths and weaknesses, I think we can get a lot of things done together. And speaking out format and showing openness to solve these problems, and that as business we're willing to stretch and go beyond what we have done in the past. Yes, that is a personal role as CEO and something I very much stand for. And I think this is also where the role of Ceres, to come back to the beginning of the conversation, has been super important to highlight that importance.
Mark, thank you. This is, we're coming to the end, but what a perfect message towards the end of the Ceres conference. You couldn't be more clear in walking the walk as well as talking the talk, and standing up for what's right. As we've seen you do it, and we know you'll do it again. We look forward to working with you. We are one global community, and we will only solve these problems if we understand that and work together. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much. It was great to be with you.